a very warm welcome from us here on the panel to you on this wonderful, glorious sunny day in this beautiful country. We have a topic that has, from the beginning already, something to do with what you see here when you go out of the door, giants. You see the giant mountains, and here we're talking about giant corporations. And we're asking the questions, they might be giant, but they look quite powerless these days. And from the time that I was able to watch TV, I know that oil companies were never particularly liked, particularly not by people who drive cars and consume the goods, and the general public in most cases for a lot of sometimes very wrong reasons. But the fact that you're not only no longer liked, but that we would have to discuss that you have no power, I think that's almost adding insult to humiliation. And so we are very curious to have an open, frank debate today about what are the drivers of this perception, or is it a reality? Has your business a sustainable future in many meanings of sustainability? And how do you see yourself positioned? And I might want to hand over to my moderating partner, Mr. Stanislav, who will continue.
Well, thank you, Leonard. I appreciate it very much. I'm also very pleased to be here again. This is my third year, and I'm honored to be here again with all of you. I find the most significant and important event in the world of ideas and content and knowledge. And also, you bring together the right people, and particularly this subject, just power. If you look to my right, these two gentlemen, one a chairman, one a CEO, with two companies whose combined GNP may rank about sixth in the world. It's very big. Their quarterly profits combined are more than most countries' GDPs. These are very big organizations producing an enormous degree of wealth. But how powerful are they? Without all that economic clout, how much power is in their hands? They're challenged by regime changes, by accidents, by the environment, meaning CO2 and ecological disasters that may or not happen. They're challenged daily. And all their investments have normally 10 to 15 years minimum before they see a result of their investments, sometimes longer. So how powerful are you two? We're going to start off with each gentleman giving a statement. First, Mr. Olila, who's chairman of Shell. Mr. Olila.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. And also, many thanks for inviting me again. This is my second visit to St. Gallen event, and I've enjoyed this year as well as my previous visit. It was slightly on under different hat. I was wearing a different hat, but it's always a pleasure. So, an interesting question being put for this panel. There are giants and there are giants. So let me make a couple of points on where the industry is, and starting from this huge change that has happened. So if we look at the last 40 years, the center of power in this industry really has shifted. Back in 1971, the top 7 publicly traded international oil companies controlled 85% of the world's oil reserves. 85%. Today, it's shifted the other way around. 80% of the world's oil reserves are being controlled by the national oil companies, the Saudi Aramco, the Petrobras, the Petronas, the Rosneft, Gazprom, and Saudi Aramco alone holds more than 1/4 of the world's remaining oil reserves. 1/4. And it's not different if you look at the gas. The figures are very, very similar. So it is the state-owned companies that really are the centers of power if you look at the reserves. But obviously, there's a very interesting field to operate. It's a very different field on what it was in 1971. Very, very different one. 71 is a landmark because it's 2 years before the first oil crisis. Couple of comments, first of all, what the business is like, the environment is like. First comment is that the surging energy demand today and the geopolitical tensions really do make the oil business much more volatile than was the case in the past. If we look at the demand for energy, it's really the rising population globally and the strong economic growth, particularly in the developing countries, the emerging economies, that drives up the energy demand. And if we look at 40 years ahead of us, in 2050, the energy demand is expected to be about twice or even more than was the total demand in the beginning of this century, so 10 years ago. So in 50 years, more than double of energy demand. And the political uncertainty in the Middle East and North Africa, which we are now experiencing, is a typical example of short-term developments driving the volatility. And this is something which does affect the industry structure big time. The second interesting observation is that if you look at the profile of the national oil companies, those companies coming from major resource holding nations, they typically are limiting their operations to so-called easy oil and gas. Gas and oil, which is technologically reasonably simple to exploit and then sell to the world markets. And what is increasingly the role of the international oil companies is to explore the frontiers, the new ways of getting energy to this globe, which seems to be wanting more and more of energy in the future. So this working in the frontier areas, be it in the deep water or be it in the Arctic area, be it in rock formations, so that gas and oil is so-called tight oil and tight gas, very difficult to exploit. This needs a lot of technology development. It also means that we need to work under elements of a lot of risk, and that obviously poses quite a bit of challenge to us. And this is typically an international oil company role to handle. Also, I think we have all seen that there's a certain amount of risk and unexpected element in this business, which is coming from the regulatory uncertainty. Partly it relates to the comments here about oil companies being under a little bit of scrutiny. They are under a lot of regulatory attention and regulatory uncertainty as well. So the risks that we are facing is quite an important element of how we run our business and how we are perceived as corporations. And a couple of elements on how we are addressing those risks. First of all, obviously, we need to spread our bets. We need to have a balanced portfolio in terms of handling the risk, making investments around the world, and over time in a way which gives us the right kind of portfolio. In fact, if you look at Shell, we have, during the last 5 years, which I'm very well acquainted, we have shifted our focus more towards OECD countries than where we were 5 or 10 years ago because of political stability issues involved. So we are looking at that very attentively. Secondly, the investments that we need to handle, we are taking a very long-term view on. So there was a low point in the cycle, 2009, 2010, as we know, because of the financial crisis globally. Both years we invested a record amount of capital expenditure into new development, new exploitation, and new equipment to move forward. So spreading the risk, taking a real careful view is very important. Secondly, diversifying is important. It's we are looking at it in many different ways. First of all, we have, as a company, moved away from oil towards increasingly gas, not away, but to a decreasing amount of gas, so that next year, 2012, we will be producing more gas than oil, continuing to be a strong oil company, obviously. And that is because we have been one of the technology leaders in finding gas from very difficult geological formations, and we have been a leader in both LNG and GTL technologies. Secondly, we are looking obviously at the challenge in the area of sustainability. So when we look at an investment horizon, we look at 30 years, and we form a view, preliminary view of what might it be 50 years from now, when we are looking at our investments. And obviously, the renewables come into the picture significantly. We are the biggest producer of biofuels. Our only way of looking at first-generation biofuels is the sugarcane in Brazil, where we have a major operation. Otherwise, we're looking at second, third generation, so that we are not conflicting with the food chain, which we feel is extremely important. Safety is obviously extremely important in this industry. We have had a track record during the last 7 years of every year improving safety record in the key parameters, and adopting a safety case approach to the difficult situations like drilling in unknown territories is very important. So if we then look at how do we really define the role of the international oil company going forward? You have the following elements. We will be a very important partner to many key national oil companies going forward. Secondly, we feel we need to be, and we will be, a technology leader in many key areas. Not only deep water, LNG, gas to liquids, GTL, but also in energy efficiency very broadly, so that we can produce the economic growth globally as an industry with lower energy content. And there, the industry and the key companies have a lot to do. Secondly, the role that the international oil companies has been assigned, and we are very glad to take that among the players in the industry, is one that is an expert in project management, particularly when you have integrated mega projects of 20 billion, 30 billion to be invested over 5 years or so, and then to be ready for launch. That's typically a role for international oil companies, and increasingly the industry needs that kind of project capability. There's also a role in providing capital. Many national oil companies are short of capital, so there's often a request that the international oil companies need to bring access to capital to some of these key projects. And then finally, very often the fact that a company like Shell has a global marketing reach, capability to sell and market the products that are coming out of some of the new projects, which are jointly handled with national oil companies. That's an important element. And I would perhaps to the big question that's sort of hanging, is there power? I think there will be an important business and quote-unquote power, if you want, for companies like ourselves, if we really are in the forefront of technology, in the forefront of providing the project know-how in major projects, if we provide access to capital and can market our products globally. That's really something to look forward to. And with these parameters in mind, and looking at the energy demand, the way it's going to be booming, and the environmental and sustainability challenge that we have, this is going to be one of the most interesting industries to go forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dudley. As Chief Executive of one of the most global companies that exists, I'd be very curious to hear your view on both the role and the risks of your business model, also with the little provocative question attached to it. What is the business model risk of a company whose main product we want to get rid of?
Well, thank you. Thank you. That sets the stage very well. So good afternoon, Joe. Thank you very much. It is good to be here at St. Gallen's. This is the first time that I've been to the forum, and I have to say the time I spent with the students this morning and everyone I've met has been most impressive. And for me, this is a welcome break to expand and listen to others' ideas on many fronts, which we don't get often these days. The subject that you described around giants or big, I think it does ring true of our companies, rings true for BP. BP's been known for a while, for a time, as beyond petroleum, trying to keep that eye on the horizon down the road. I think that's migrated to big problems in the last year. And there's another one I've just heard now, big but powerless, so I have to take this back with me. We do think that global energy companies like BP and Shell, we do play a significant role in societies around the globe. But on the other hand, we face an enormous range of risks and challenges. I think the important question in this discussion is how we manage the many, many risks we face. How do we do that successfully and acceptably to retain this license to operate as a good corporate citizen in the communities where we work and the countries? And only then will companies like ours survive, to be able to earn the opportunity to continue to grow and invest. Let me look at a couple of these points in turn. Companies like ours, and I have Shell and BP, our role as an industry and a company is to provide the energy. I firmly believe it's to provide and help provide the energy that society needs to function. We don't in all forms of energy, but we do contribute to many of the forms of heat, light, and mobility. And that energy, I believe, lifts people out of poverty, and it underpins some very complex economies all over the world. Companies like BP and Shell, we've evolved over time into these very large organizations that must adapt very well to that well-described description this morning by the keynote speaker about the evolution of globalization. That's the world that we have to adapt to, and it's changing very fast. We have 80,000 people across the globe. We generate last year $300 billion in revenues each year. But I'd note, Joe, about the profits last year, BP actually had a loss because it had to take a huge amount of money off to the side to meet our obligations in the Gulf of Mexico. We do produce in 29 countries around the world, and we are either the largest or one of the largest foreign investors and the largest taxpayer in many countries, including Russia, China, Egypt, Angola, Azerbaijan, Trinidad and Tobago, a wide spread of countries as the largest taxpayer. But that scope obviously does not bring us in vulnerability, as we've seen in the last year. We almost lost BP last year because of an accident. We face a wide range of risks and challenges, from physical hazards, safety concerns, to regime and policy changes, to the potential breakdown, like all big organizations do, of your internal control systems. We drill for oil and gas in very extreme climates, great depths, high temperatures, high pressures. And as one of our very wise managers in refining reminds me, we boil crude oil and gasoline at refineries for a living. We operate within a world where constraints are increasing, and I think many of them are necessary ones. These include greater regulation, scrutiny on operational and environmental performance. This increasing demand for greater transparency about the impact of our operations from NGOs and governments, our own employees. We place pressure from our shareholders for growth and greater returns in a quarter-by-quarter world. And as we've learned this year, there's an even new fundamental pressure of the scrutiny of a 24/7 media cycle and the social media. BP's learned a lot about this in the last year. Increasing competition and the involvement of the national oil companies, as Jorma said, who today dominate the access to oil and gas resources. Have the same figures. Today, we figure the large oil companies is roughly only 8% of the world's oil and gas are managed or owned by the international oil companies. And we're exposed to geopolitical risks like we spoke about this morning in the Middle East. And these challenges are not going away for companies like ours. They will only accelerate. Developing countries require more and more energy based on current energy trends. You described it. I'll add to your description of it. By 2030, we think the world will be consuming 40% more energy than it does today. And nearly all of that growth will come from the emerging economies, China, Indonesia, India. That's only 19 years away. So for large oil companies, BP and Shell included, the search for new resources for our involvement to help to supply the demand, which will be for every kind of energy. Certainly renewables will be the fastest growing one, but the fundamental role of even coal, oil, gas, hydropower, all forms of energy are going to be in demand. It's going to take us to the most difficult places, the deep water frontiers, and we will have to work with the national oil companies. Concerns about climate change require that we help develop the right energy mix, and I believe we are in a long wave transition to a low-carbon energy world. Companies like BP and Shell both, we're investing and have invested about $8 billion in wind and biofuels, and we'll invest $1.5 billion of capital this year in biofuels. These are long wavelength trends. So it will be a while before I think our major products move, but we'll think ahead and be able to migrate. How do we navigate in this incredibly complicated world successfully and responsibly? First, companies like ours, we need to make sure that risk management is a way of life. There are so many risks. It means thinking about all the things that could go wrong, having a plan, including understanding very low probability, high consequence events like we've suffered, industrial safety, and also geopolitics. As a result, we as a company have adapted and made many organizational capability changes in BP as a result of what happened last year. I could list them for a long time. But secondly, I believe a global organization needs global standards. Even with the globalization trends that are decentralized today, companies like BP and Shell are bound to comply with local laws, but in some cases those represent a minimum, and we will need to set our own, often higher standards based on our own experience and judgment of how to manage the risks we face. So for example, every well we drill now in BP is drilled by a single global well organization, the same consistent operating standards around the globe. That's a kind of decentralization we cannot afford. We have to do this now, obviously. A similar way, our code of conduct has to be global, provides us with a global ethical standard. And third, we need great responsibility towards others. And that means contributing to the places we operate. We are guests in many countries. This is why we invest in education, help local governments and businesses build their capabilities around the globe. And we seek to develop the capabilities of our own people, ensuring that we mirror the societies where we work. We must always try to provide a working environment for our employees and business partners so that they can give their best, otherwise they'll go somewhere else. Examples, I was in Iraq 2 weeks ago where we're helping to increase production from one of the great oil fields of the world, the Rumaila field. It's a giant oil field, devastated by war, many years of war. Our role there is very important in helping Iraq's economy, and the workers benefit from the skills that they're acquiring. They have been cut off from many of the skills in the industry for a long time. Shell is also working in Iraq, and it's a great example of how now we're partnering with national oil companies, and in that case with PetroChina as well as Iraqi companies. Complex job technically and interculturally. I think fourth, we need to think about the long term. Our investments, as Joe said, are incredibly long term. You think about the fast product cycles of many industries today. Ours remain very, very long term, making big bets at times when commodity cycles swing up and down. We have to find that sustainable growth into the future. We have to invest in best-in-class risk management, strong, deep capability and commitment of people. And I would say last but not least, we have a responsibility to be transparent. That's a trend that was pointed out this morning. It's absolutely the world we know we will live in. We are too big to hide, and we have nothing to hide. And our actions and our relationships are very public ones. That means we have to act with integrity, and we have to do what we say we will do. And I believe the more accountable an organization is, the more sustainable it will be, and I'm sure of that. And I think I probably have said enough, Joe, so thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for these remarks. Just to try to pinpoint you on the giant but powerless issue. You have clearly explained that you are highly capital intensive. You're having a very long duration on the bets that you have to make. It's decades or even longer that your investment cycles require. Now, you're doing this within an environment that is, let's call it, not only the oil price is volatile, but also the ethics are very volatile of this planet at the moment. And 15 years ago, there wasn't much debate. There was a debate, but not that much about the carbon emission. As a result, you've indicated you're making huge investments in biofuel. Now, I'm just an average kind of a guy, but carbons are bad. But someone in 10 years could say burning things that we eat is a very bad idea too. And how are you going to deal with the issue that you're effectively making not only business bets, but ethical bets, not knowing how the environment is going to react to it, and might tell you in 10 years that it's the most unethical thing to do, to grow a crop, and instead of feed it to a poor child, burn it in a car in West Berlin?
Okay, I get going. So that's obviously one of the key dilemmas, and even if it's dramatically put, it's often exactly these things that we have to consider. I think that basically the answer is that when you look at these investment decisions, more than in many other business, we need to be transparent and discuss with all the stakeholders in a very open way. So if you look at the environmental issues, we need to discuss with the local people involved, as well as the international organizations which are involved or feel that they are involved, so that we get the right kind of feedback, in addition to having the proper dialogue, which we obviously have in even other cases with the regulators and with the governments that are operating in the field. And we need to take our own view on where the question about the energy mix will be evolving in the next 30 to 50 years. That's essentially has to be the base that we are looking at. For instance, we have to take a view on something like how quickly shall there be very fast product development, research and development in the area of battery technology, so that electric cars will be a real competitor to combustion engine. And all the research which we look at seems to indicate that it will take quite a long time, which then indicates that the hybrid will be an important element in the mix of mobility in the intermediary period. In 50 years, perhaps electric car will be an important one, but you cannot expect it to be so in 10, 15 years unless there's some sort of a totally surprising breakthrough in the battery technology. Therefore, hybrid is an important one, and therefore also the biofuels will be filling in a role. It's this kind of considerations, and those entail a huge amount of business risk. And we have to make, as boards and as senior managers, we have to make those judgments. Ethical judgments, you referred to the biofuel issue. I think I want to but it is an important example because we in Shell have been, during the last 5 years when I've been involved, we have been put forward by many partners from emerging economies, very attractive proposals saying you should go to palm oil, you should go to this and that, food-based alternatives in terms of biofuels. And we have said no to all those alternatives, even if money-wise, even if profit-wise, it would look pretty okay and actually pretty good. And the only first-generation biofuel that we have said yes to is the sugarcane in Brazil, where it does not conflict in any way with the production of either foodstuffs or the situation of the rainforests, which is the other consideration in certain other countries where you have an alternative possibility for sugarcane. So it's an extremely tedious process and much more than just an energy technology issue that we have to address.
Don't you then sometimes feel that we in the rest of the world offload on you the thing that we consume it, but we don't want to hear about how it gets there, and if it goes wrong, it's you?
Let me push on that for a second. I mean, one or two of you, I think, have testified to the American Senate, American Congress at one point in time. Tell us about your power. You're drilling in the Gulf. Unfortunately, an accident happens. You can't drill in the Gulf. Why do you drill there? Because you can't go anyplace else. Because you're prohibited, 80% of the world. Price of gasoline goes to $4, and you're blamed for it. You're told to invest in all these other things that take 20 years to emerge and become mature. How do you react to that, number one? How do you change that impression, number two? Not to say you're powerful, but to say, here's what we're trying to do. And then we're telling you to go into even more high-risk areas, which jeopardize your future tremendously because the technology challenges it puts you on. And how powerful is that technology to allow you to feel safe for us going forward to say we can really deliver what we want, but we don't like how we get it?
One of the things I'm struck by as we sit in the heart of Europe or in the US, that is the view towards oil companies. There are huge parts of the world that are very proud of their ability to supply energy. You are very much welcomed. People actually want the investment and want your involvement and want to listen to you. It is particularly difficult, I think, in the U.S. in the political process right now with high energy prices. It was the same way in 72, 79, 98, 2008, 2011. There's a cycle here. And it's hard to get out of that cycle. I watch with some interest the debate on shale gas, which has unlocked a very clean-burning fuel in the U.S. It was very short of it, now has 50 to 100 years of it. And yet the population's sort of turning on that and seems to be more in favor of burning coal. So there's a rich mix of debates that we get involved with. What we have to do, to your question, is, and I know Shell is very good at this, we have policy groups, and we debate, and we debate, and we debate. And we went through exactly the same debate with biofuels ethically. As a policy, we will not invest in biofuel and corn-based ethanol that takes away from food. It will be in the Brazilian grazing grasslands, which is the other alternative use for it, and that way we think about the ethical investments that we make. I think it is very hard, though, in some countries to have people understand the basis of the energy that they need. The U.S., I'll say it as because I'm an American, I think the U.S. has been spoiled with cheap energy for decades. When the price of gasoline gets to $4 a gallon, people are outraged. And I live in England when it's $9 a gallon and people don't complain about it as much. So I think there's a false sense of reality in places. I think for BP right now, we're not going to be a company that can lead and change public opinion, obviously. But over time, people will need energy.
Again, the subject of, a giant, but are you powerless or do you have power? Everyone knows, who knows the oil and gas business, that every place you go is high risk. And usually you go to areas which have high political risk to them. That's where the oil happens to sit, where they're unstable or what may be perceived as unreliable or insecure countries. And that's where oil and gas happens to sit. How do you feel about the word power in that situation? When you're going into an area, you know that politically it could change tomorrow morning and explode on you tomorrow morning. Where does power come into play in that one? And should we then think about the whole energy environment differently, to not have to rely upon those power centers, which some of us in the world have concerns about?
Yeah, I mean, this is a dramatic saying, saying that, yes, oil companies very, very powerful because they are big, the projects are big, they are working together with the governments or national oil companies, and we are so dependent on how well they do their job in mitigating the risks. We don't feel that we are particularly powerful. We feel, first of all, if you look at Shell or BP, we are each producing about 2% of the global needs for oil or gas. 2% or 3%. If you look at many other businesses, there are many companies who are providing 10, 20% of the global need of a certain product, and there's no discussion about the power. So I think that's one thing. I think it's quite simple with this kind of reality numbers, that the power that we have is perceived to be high if we really do our job well and provide the kind of energy that people need, and we are perceived then to make a real good profit out of it, and while people then forget the risk involved, because by definition, when we are in a high-risk business, if we really do well our job, there is a return because there's high risk. And I think there's a little bit of this sort of corollary which leads to people's perceptions. And I think it's human, and we are ready to take a little bit of hit on that. I think it's part of the job.
Yeah, I would agree with what you've said. There's a couple of angles here that there is a feeling, I think, in society that big is bad, and that therefore big isn't transparent. If you've been in the industry, you realize you're making $20 billion investments that take 10, 15 years before there's any revenue, and you begin to look that there's very few companies can do that on single projects. And so what happens for a company like BP is it's big because it diversifies the risk. So it does what it does in many places around the world, diversifies risk, partners with other people to share risk. And that's why the energy industry has gotten so large. It's part of the characteristic, I think, of energy. The second thing that people in the industry, having lived through the price cycle 4 times, and I remember the dark, dark days if you're in the industry of 1999 and 2000 with $9 oil. It was not that long ago. 2009, the oil price was $37, and you are trying to sustain an organization and trying to make big bets when you are close to losing money. You have to very much try to think long term. And it is an unpopular organization when the prices are high. It is a forgotten operation when the prices are low. But we've got to work through that. And I think that's what makes the oil and gas industry so interesting.
I think if you tie this to the discussions both yesterday and this morning, which what you heard, a lot of concern around the world is governments are going through changes. Take North Africa and the Middle East. Governments were considered corrupt, and corruption being rampant, benefits not trickling down to the mass population. What role do you have there? And those countries, or countries like them, where you have these regimes for decades, where it is corrupt, what is your responsibility there in being powerful and large and necessary to those countries? What is your role?
Well, I think this is where being big is not bad, because there are plenty of places we operate where we're big enough to just say no, and people step back. And I think in that sense, we bring our standards, our ethical way of doing things, our standards of procurement, selection, that are what governments want to see, and we are less subject to that because we're big. And this is where, and Shell has exactly the same view on this, I know, our ethical standards are such we just won't do certain things. And we will withdraw from countries if we are put in that position. And I think over time, that's where you see us playing a role that I think helps. I also think I see it time and time again, and I was very interested in the gentleman this morning talking about peace and mediating. You would be surprised how many times in an oil company we are in the role of mediating between countries to solve big problems. And we do that sort of in the right spirit, but that is one of those things that we just naturally find ourselves doing.
Big is an advantage in this case, as you say. Let's say there's a country who wants to have the corruption continue and ask you for that corruption. You walk away. Is that a statement to other players? Behave how you go there, be careful how you go there? Or there's someone not with the ethics you may have because you're big and powerful, you can go elsewhere, comes in from the side? Or does it change the game at all by you saying, I'll step away from this?
Yeah, I mean, there has been concrete situation where I have seen during the last 5 years, and there were more before. I know because things have been improving. So there have been concrete situations where we have stepped out after we have said no, no, no. This is not the way we do business. This is not how our company is run. And then we pull out. Somebody else steps in later. We don't know. But what we know is that BP and us, we have very similar ways of handling this. And I think there has been quite a bit of progress here because some key players in the industry have taken such an absolute view, which is very much being supported by Transparency International, being our partner. Mm-hmm. So TI is a partner. They know what we do. They are involved and very much part of the process in us making sure in all parts of the world that nobody is trying to make an exception and make his or her life easier or something like that. I mean, you know, there's a lot of work to be done because this is a tough issue.
Well, before I open, if we would like to encourage everyone to ask you questions, I would just like to leave one last question with you, which is you've very convincingly defended that your size is actually very relative compared to the size of the market, that your size, your diversity, and therefore some kind of security to what you're doing. But isn't your size and the diversity, on the other hand, also not the problem in securing that you can manage your risk, the breakdown of internal controls, and the fact that you're very big and therefore once something breaks down, you're also able to be attacked?
Well, I think so not only in the oil and gas industry, but many of you here have seen the sort of corporate cycle, I call it the accordion of decentralization and centralization. And the oil industry, often because of the price cycle, has done some of that. I mean, we've just really done a lot of soul searching after the last year, have concluded we need absolute centralization now of many, many things in a world that is that is decentralizing globally. And that's the only way we're going to be able to do this. If we're not successful in standardizing our code of conduct, our ethics, our technical standards, and our way of doing things, and there are parts of our portfolio that can't get there, we will walk away from pieces of it. This is a huge challenge. It's a huge management challenge, ever thus, for many companies in many different industries as well. But you put your finger right on the thing that we must do well. Decentralizing in the kinds of businesses we're in comes with great downside.
We'll turn to the floor, the audience. And it's hard to see these bright lights, but put your hands up. And the hand I see to my left, stand up, gentlemen, there you are. And we have microphones that will come to you slowly, but eventually. And let's get the second speaker lined up. If someone on this right-hand side stand up, and we'll get another microphone going towards you from the other side.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Raghav from India. You're talking about conflicts. You BP and Shell being involved in trying to resolve conflicts in areas where you work with to try to keep peace over there. So, which means you've been working in areas where there've been warring tribes. How ethical? Warring tribes or warring nations. How ethical is it of you to risk your employees' lives by working in that place when there are wars over the same time? It's good to maintain peace, but at the same time, you're working at a time when employees' lives could be at risk. So how would you justify the decision to work there?
Well, when I say mediating peace, it is often the mediator between industrial logic or efficiency of two countries who won't talk to each other when clearly the right thing to do is connect countries in ways. That's the sort of role we play rather than political solutions. But I will say, we have an incredibly adventurous industry of people who will work and have grown up working in many, many difficult environments around the world. And we have several hundred people now working in Iraq in the oil fields. There are mines in the oil fields. We're demining these. And all I can say is that we probably have twice as many people eager to work in these circumstances. And I think we are incredibly careful about the safety of our people. But there is a characteristic in oil and gas that is quite ingrained as well. You've probably seen that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think perhaps what I would like to underline is that we obviously are very careful not to getting involved and taking a political view on any conflict. It's rather that you have situations where conflicts emerge either within a country, it does happen, as well as between the countries in areas where there is oil either being a prospect for exploitation or exploration or being produced. The company like ourselves can be an example with ethical code of conduct and being party to a discussion in how you can solve disagreements. And this does happen. It's not something we would like to see happening often, but if we can help, we will do that, obviously not taking any risk on the safety of our employees. No, that certainly would not work at all.
I think someone here has the microphone, and pass the microphone over here while this man's speaking, or the lady speaking, sorry.
I'm Marike Stucke from Hamburg.
The
Mr.
mic,
Dudley.
please.
We can't hear you.
Okay, is it better now?
A bit better.
I'm Marike Stucke from Hamburg, and I would like to address my question to Mr. Dudley. You stated before that you had to cope with some problems last year in the Gulf of Mexico. So I got the impression that no one is really talking about it anymore, especially in the media. How did you turn BP's image around during the last year? Or to speak with the words of the conference, what kind of power did you use?
Well, I must say this is one of the few places I've been where it is not talked about constantly. It is still talked about very, very constantly in the United States and in many, many places in the oil and gas industry. So I appreciate very much your thought that maybe our image has recovered, but actually I think we have a long way to go to rebuild the trust that we lost last year. I think one of the things, though, that I think, back to this comment, relates to is big bad. There's probably only 4 or 5 companies in the world that could have responded to that accident in the way that BP did. It lost money last year. It funded $41 billion of costs set aside, mobilized 48,000 people, 6,500 ships, cleaned up the beaches all across the Gulf before the tourist seasons are back. That's a massive response that I think in time people will appreciate. And I do know that we're not a particularly popular company in the United States. But there are many governments around the world, from China to many places we operate, and they say, we saw what you did. That's the kind of company we want in our country. It's an unfortunate accident. We know you will be safe, and we want you to be safe. Tell us what you learned, how to make it safer, and come work here, because we want to know how to respond to something like that. And I think in time that might be appreciated. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to underline the fact that, I mean, the whole industry took the whole of the incident very seriously and gave help to BP, expert help and other help in ways we could. And this continues to be talked about. So this is a boardroom issue in the industry in terms of how do we make sure for the future that we operate safely, and if an accident happens, that we have the means of responding a lot better than was deemed by the public perception in this situation. Because Bob used the word earlier, you know, we have to operate in a way to earn our license to operate, and that is quite important. So as an industry, we are working and continuing to work very hard to make sure that we have the safety really high up on our agenda continuously.
We're going to take one more question, then we'll give each of these gentlemen about a minute to make a final comment, and I'll turn to my co-chair. One more question.
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Camilo from Colombia. And in developing countries, we have continually seen this metaphor in which you are compared in size to countries. However, I would like to ask you if you actually see yourselves as states, and whether if you were given the chance to have a seat in the UN, would you sit there? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I've been invited to many interesting places, but not the UN. No, that was a light note. So, honestly, I don't think we see ourselves as states in any way. I mean, we see our role very clearly as being private enterprises with a clear goal setting. Providing energy to people which they increasingly want more in a way which is sustainable and long-term viable. So, and we take a horizon which is really very, very long, and it's a global horizon, a global view with a very long time horizon, which many states, by the way, don't do, because they can look at either coal, you know, we're happy with this coal, you know, what are they talking about, climate? You hear that in many countries, and we can't take that sort of a limited view. We have to look at this energy provision in such a way that we can make a living, offer employment to ourselves, and so that we can work with our stakeholders 25, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And there we need a private enterprise attitude, which is a long term, so that we have our balance sheet to look into, we have our ethical values, which can carry ourselves very far forward. It's a very different thing from how the states can look at, because they have the geography, they can look at much more confined set of issues on parameters. I'm happy there will not be the invitation to UN because it wouldn't fit in.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely. I think one of the things we should never do as a company is begin to think we should take the role of government. We actually say to governments often, we pay taxes. We should not replace what you do as governments. And I think that's very important for us. We're investors, we have shareholders. That's a distinction we actually have to make often with governments. And then the second thing is very important, I think, is the humility and realization that we are guests in many countries around the world. We have to do this with humility, great respect, and the minute that we begin to get arrogant about the role that we play, as good as we think we are doing, then you have a problem. And I don't think, I think that we try to make sure our organization doesn't have the bravado or the arrogance about the role that we play in many places around the world.
Before we conclude, and I pass my co-chair, I'll make one quick comment. Both gentlemen have said we must earn continuously the license to operate. And that can disappear at any second for multiple reasons. Because there's so many stakeholders with different views and different suspicions that license to operate can go away very quickly. So it's called trust, and they have to earn that every day. The day they forget it, the day you're out of business. So are you powerful or not?
We're really careful.
Good comment.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your frankness, and thanks very much for coming here for this debate. Maybe it's a debate where one can take the question home that you're at the very center of globalization, running a very global business where your global scale in your market is not even that big. But in relation to the countries to which we are used to, you are very big. And the problem of the way how we're going to organize globalization and the governance it will have, you are at the center of this problem, but it's a problem that goes far beyond your industry. Thank you very much for participation.